good evening, and welcome back to the Shadow Nook. This evening we are travelling down to London, and in the heart of the city of London, just across the road from the famous criminal court known as the Old Bailey, sits a Victorian pub with a long and unsettling reputation. At first glance, the Viaduct Tavern doesn't look particularly sinister. The building is elegant and ornate. Large windows reflect the street outside. And inside, polished wood panels glow under warm lights. Mirrors and brass fittings give the interior the feel of a traditional Victorian gin palace. Office workers, tourists and locals stop for drinks every day. It feels like any other historic London pub. But beneath the comfortable atmosphere, beneath the floorboards and barrels of ale, there is a darker story. Because the Viaduct Tavern was built on ground that has witnessed centuries of crime, punishment and death. For hundreds of years, the streets surrounding the tavern were dominated by one of the most feared prisons in England, the infamous Newgate Prison. The place is so brutal that many prisoners considered execution a mercy compared to life inside its walls, and today many believe that some of the spirits connected to that grim history may still linger nearby. To truly understand why the Viaduct Tavern has such a haunted reputation, we have to go back several centuries. Directly across the street from the pub once stood the massive walls of Newgate Prison. The prison first opened in the 12th century, and it remained in operation for nearly 700 years. Over that time, thousands upon thousands of prisoners passed through its gates. Some were guilty of terrible crimes, others were imprisoned for surprisingly small offences. In earlier centuries of English law, people could be sentenced to prison for things like stealing bread, pickpocketing and failing to pay debts. The conditions inside Newgate Prison were notoriously horrific. Prisoners were packed into cramped, filthy rooms. Disease spread easily, and food was scarce. Violence between inmates was common. Wealthier prisoners could sometimes pay for better conditions, but poorer prisoners were often left to suffer in the dark and overcrowded cells. Many people died inside Newgate Prison before they ever reached trial. Newgate Prison was not only a place of imprisonment, it was also closely connected to one of the most brutal public spectacles in British history, which was public hangings. For many years, prisoners condemned to death at Newgate were executed nearby at a place called Tyburn. But eventually executions began taking place directly outside the prison itself. Condemned prisoners were led from their cells to the gallows in front of the enormous crowds. These events were not quiet or solemn. They were loud, chaotic, and disturbingly festive. Thousands of people would gather to watch. Street vendors sold food and alcohol. Some spectators even brought their children. For many Londoners at the time, executions were treated as a form of entertainment. Taverns and pubs in surrounding streets did incredibly good business on execution days. People would drink heavily while waiting for the spectacle to begin. Some pubs even advertised windows with a view of the gallows. The area where the Viaduct Tavern now stands would have been filled with crowds, noise and drunken excitement on those grim days. When the trapdoor opened and the condemned person fell, the crowd often cheered. It's difficult to imagine that today, but the echoes of these events may still linger in the area. So while Newgate Prison stood just across the road, another prison once stood directly on the site where the Viaduct Tavern now exists. This prison was called the Giltspur Street Compter. It operated between 1791 and 1853. Compared to Newgate, it was much smaller, but its purpose was similar. It held people who had been arrested for smaller crimes. Many were debtors who had fallen behind on payments. Others were petty criminals waiting for a trial. The building contained rows of small stone cells. Prisoners were held there in difficult conditions, often for weeks or months at a time. Eventually, the prison was demolished in the mid-1800s, but parts of its underground structure still remained. And when the Viaduct Tavern was built later in the Victorian era, those old underground spaces became the pub's cellar. If you visit the Viaduct Tavern today and descend into the basement, you'll notice something unusual. The rooms are not shaped like typical pub storage spaces. Instead, they feel narrow and confined. Some areas are separated by heavy iron bars. The stone walls feel thick and cold. And many people who have visited the cellar say it strongly resembles old prison cells. Whether they truly are former cells or simply storage rooms from the original prison building is still debated to this day. But the atmosphere down there is unmistakable. Staff often describe the basement as the most uncomfortable part of the building. Even during the daytime, the cellar can feel strangely oppressive, as if the air itself carries memories from the past. Now, one of the most infamous ghost stories associated with the Viaduct Tavern happened in the 1990s. At the time, a pub manager was working alone in the cellar. He was performing routine tasks, checking supplies and organising stock, and it was late in the evening. The pub above was quiet, and the basement, as usual, was dimly lit and silent, until suddenly the cellar door slammed shut behind him. At exactly the same moment, the lights went out. The entire room was plunged into darkness, and at first he assumed the lights had simply tripped. But when he reached for the door, it would not open. He pushed, he pulled, he tried everything he could, but the door refused to move. Panic began to set in, and the cellar was pitch black, and he felt completely trapped. Eventually he started shouting for help, and after a few minutes his wife, who was upstairs, heard him calling. She went down to the cellar and opened the door. From her side, it opened effortlessly. There was no lock engaged, nothing blocking it, no explanation for why it had refused to open moments earlier for the manager. He insisted that something had held the door shut, something on the other side. According to some versions of the story, the experience in the cellar became even more disturbing. While the manager struggled with the door in total darkness, he reportedly heard something like a voice, quiet but close. And completely unexpected, the voice whispered, "There are just two of us down here now." The words seemed to come from somewhere inside the cellar, but no one else was supposed to be there. When the door finally opened and the lights returned, the cellar was completely empty. So another strange incident that occurred in 1999 during renovation work was when two workers were installing a new carpet inside of the pub. They had rolled the carpet up into a large cylinder so that they could prepare the floor underneath. While working, one of the men suddenly felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned around immediately, but nobody was there. Assuming it was his co-worker playing a prank, he laughed it off. But moments later, both men witnessed something they couldn't explain. The heavy rolled-up carpet slowly lifted off of the ground, only slightly, but certainly enough for both of them to see. It hovered for a moment and then dropped back onto the floor with a loud thud. Neither man could explain what they had just seen. There were no wires, no machinery, and no one close enough to move it. After the incident, both workers reportedly refused to continue working alone in that part of the building. Now, over the years, staff working at the Viaduct Tavern began to joke about the strange things that seemed to happen inside of the building. Eventually, they gave the supposed spirit a name. They called him Fred. Fred is believed to be a mischievous presence rather than a dangerous one. Staff have blamed him for numerous strange occurrences, things like glasses moving slightly along the bar, drinks disappearing when no one is looking, lights turning themselves on or off, and taps running briefly before shutting off again. Some customers have even reported feeling someone tap them on the shoulder, and when they turn around, there is nobody there. Staff sometimes jokingly say that Fred likes to join in with the drinking, helping himself to unfinished pints left behind on the bar. Now, one of the darker legends connected to the building involves the women's restroom. According to local stories, the building may have briefly operated as a brothel in the early 1900s. During that time, it is said that a sex worker was murdered somewhere within that building. Some believe her spirit never left. Staff working late shifts had often reported strange activity near the ladies' toilets. Hand dryers activating by themselves, cubicle doors slamming shut unexpectedly, lights flickering when the room is empty. And some people have also described an overwhelming feeling of being watched whilst inside, even when they know the room is completely empty. So the Viaduct Tavern stands on ground layered with centuries of history. Beneath it once stood a prison. Across the street stood one of London's most feared jails. Thousands of criminals passed through the area. Many lost their lives nearby. And over the years, countless strange events have been reported inside the pub. Doors locking by themselves, voices in empty rooms, objects moving when no one is near them. Are these stories simply legends that have grown over time? Or could the echoes of London's darker past still linger beneath this tavern? If you ever visit the Viaduct Tavern and decide to walk down into the cellar, you might want to listen carefully, because if the stories are true, you might not be alone down there. Let me know down below if you enjoyed today's story, and let me do your oracle card reading before you leave. As usual, I will draw one card and you can interpret it however you like. Okay. We have community, which is the B. You are a powerful creator. Your work blesses everything you touch. Be open to receiving sweetness. You are the queen of abundance. Let me know down below what this could possibly mean to you. Thank you again for joining me this evening in the Shadow Nook. Don't forget to collect your subscription on your way out, and sleep well.